Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 5, and my name is Janet Szabo. I will be your guide as we explore all things sewing. This week is going to be kind of a mishmash. I don't really have a specific topic to discuss this week, but it's been a very eventful week here, and it has involved a fair bit of sewing. So I'm going to give you a quick recap of what's been going on, and I think that will take up most of the episode. As many of you know, I live in northwest Montana. We're not too far from Glacier National Park. If you were to drive east from Kalispell, which is the large town in the middle of the valley, if you were to drive east from Kalispell about 10 miles and you hit the mountains, the Swan Range of the Rocky Mountains, and took a hard right, you would be on the road that I live on. And that road travels along the foothills of the mountains for about 10 miles. And our community here is called Mountain Brook. Mountain Brook has been here since the early 1900s. It was settled by a lot of logging families. There was a lot of logging that was happening back then. And it was far enough from Kalispell that you only probably went to town 2 or 3 times a year, because in order to get there, you had to drive to the river and then take a ferry to get across the river to go to town. And then you had to do it all in reverse to get back home. So our little community here learned to be very self-sufficient, very self-reliant. We have a group of ladies that call themselves the Mountain Brook Ladies Club. And Ladies Club has been in existence almost as long as people have lived here in Mountain Brook. Our fire station was built on donated land with volunteer labor. Our schoolhouse was built on donated land with volunteer labor. We have a little side road that heads down into the valley that's called Bachelor Grade, and we have a little kind of an urban legend about the naming of that road. It's called Bachelor Grade because it was hand dug by a group of bachelors who wanted to get their products to market. So we've got a long history of community involvement and being self-sufficient and being self-reliant, and being that my husband and I have a libertarian political bent, this is the perfect place for us to be living. And we've been here for about 30 years. One other organization that I belong to is called the Mountain Brook Craft Cooperative. And it is a group of about a dozen women who banded together about 13 or 14 years ago and formed a cooperative in the state of Montana so that they could sell the craft items that they were making. And they're typically sewn items, but we do have members of our craft cooperative who are painters. We have a woman who does book art. We have people who make quilts. We have people who sew other kinds of things. We've got a couple of jewelers. It's a very productive group of women, just women so far, but it's a very productive group of women. And we meet, not formally, we meet every Thursday at the community center that is now housed on the campus of our old schoolhouse, the schoolhouse that was built in 1927, that's no longer being used as a schoolhouse. We use that campus as a community center. And our sewing group meets there every Thursday from about 10 to 3. And a lot of the women in that sewing group are also in the craft cooperative. Some of them are in the Mountain Brook Ladies Club. I don't happen to be a member of the Mountain Brook Ladies Club right now, but I am a member of the craft co-op, and I do try to get to sewing at least a couple of times a month, just to see what everybody's working on. It's an incredibly supportive group of women. We have show and tell at about 11 o'clock in the morning. The hour before lunchtime is devoted to show and tell. And everyone is really supportive and really encouraging. We don't require that you have a certain skill level. We don't require that you sew certain items or produce certain items. We just get together because we want to, and it's a fun time. So, having said all of that, you've heard me talking about our craft co-op sale, and that is held every September, usually the last weekend of the month. And it's held at the Mennonite church that I belong to, which is also in our community. And I am the pianist at the Mennonite church. The craft co-op started out having their sale at our campus when it first started at the community center campus. They quickly outgrew that space. I think there were 1 or 2 years where they held it at the elementary school. And eventually they moved over to the Mennonite church, and that has turned out to be a great place to have the sale. So we all get together on Thursday and we set up the church. We put out all of our items for display. Everything's been priced and labeled by each individual person. And then our sale is held from 10 to 6 on Friday and 10 to 4 on Saturday. So this year, I did not manage to make it to the setup day. And the reason I didn't make it to the setup day was because my husband and I also raise pigs and chickens. And you're going to say, what do pigs and chickens have to do with sewing? Well, in this case, they had a lot to do with sewing. We raised 8 pigs this year. Normally we do 6, but our supplier, the woman that we get our piglets from, had 2 extra, and we were the last customers. So she asked us if we wanted to take the 2 extra piglets, and we decided, sure, we could do 8 this year. We have the property that we live on, and then adjacent to that, we own a rental property, and that's where my garden and the pig pasture are located. So we put our 8 pigs out on the pig pasture, and they spent the summer out there rooting around and being happy and doing what pigs do and getting fed scraps from all the neighbors. And in August, we were supposed to take them to a processor south of here. There are not very many processors left where we live, and getting into a processor to have your animals processed is tricky business. We had a processor and we were on their schedule every year in October, and about 3 months before we had a group of pigs ready to go to them, they went out of business without warning, and we had to find a different processor. So we found a processor south of us and we used them, except that this year they changed the processing date on us twice. The first time I called and I said, I just want to confirm that this is the date that we're supposed to bring them in. And they said, oh, we can't do them on that date. Can you bring them a week later? And I said, sure. So loading up 8 pigs into a trailer and driving them 80 miles to the processor is a process, for lack of a better word. It requires that we load them up Sunday night and then drive them down Monday morning. And we did that, and we got to the processor and realized that there was nobody there. They had changed the processing date on us again, and I wasn't aware of it because I hadn't received their phone call. And we ended up having to bring all of the pigs back and put them back in our pasture. And at that point, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. My husband, who pours concrete for a living, does concrete foundations, happened to be talking to one of the mixer drivers who used to raise pigs, and he said, let me see if I can get you in with this outfit northwest of here. So he called them and made some arrangements, and he said, if you will trade me one of your pigs, I will take care of getting them up to the processor. And we said that was a great deal because my husband didn't have time to load the pigs and drive them up there again. So this guy took them up there and took care of making sure that everything was ready to go, and they had all the paperwork that they needed. And they called everybody because we sell our pigs to customers. They called all of our customers and got their orders, and they said it'll be about 3 weeks. And I thought to myself, they're going to call us and ask us to come pick up the pork the same week that I'm doing the craft co-op sale. And sure enough, the day before we were supposed to set up for the craft co-op sale on Wednesday afternoon, the processor called and said, "Oh, hey, all of your pork is ready and you need to come up ASAP and get it out of our freezer because we need the space." So all of a sudden I was scrambling and realized that I couldn't go on Thursday to help set up for the craft co-op sale. And for a while I was kicking around the idea of not even doing the craft co-op sale because I also couldn't be there on Saturday because I was teaching a t-shirt class. Part of the deal, part of the obligation of belonging to this craft co-op is that you have to participate in the setting up and taking down of the sale if you want to reap the profits. If for some reason you cannot participate, you can still sell your items, but the co-op gets a larger cut of the profits. So I kicked around the idea of not participating, and I was talked into participating by two of the other members, and they said, well, as long as you're here on Friday and as long as you come to help clean up on Saturday, we'll consider that you've discharged your obligation to the craft co-op. So one of our pork customers and I drove up to the processor, which is about 2 hours away. We drove up there on Thursday and picked up 700 pounds of pork and brought it back, and he helped me deliver it to the other customers. And that took care of Thursday, and I wasn't able to go help set up for the sale. I had left all of my items there, and a couple of my friends put everything out for me. So I went on Friday, and I was there for about 6 hours during Friday's sale. Got to visit with a lot of people. It was very busy in the morning. We had a lull in the afternoon. And then on Saturday, I taught a class at our local quilt store. I had a request for a class on the Laundry Day Tea by Love Notions. And I contacted Love Notions because it's a free pattern. If you join their Facebook group, you can get a code to get the pattern for free. Otherwise, you can just buy it off their website if you'd prefer. But I contacted them and just said, I would like to teach this class. Is this okay? And they said, yes, please have everyone download a copy of the pattern. So I got to the quilt store Saturday morning and realized that I had 7 students signed up for the class, but I only had 6 students in the class because one of the students had to leave town and couldn't take the class. But if you listened to last week's podcast about taking classes from the student's perspective and the teacher's perspective, you heard my little sermon about being prepared for class. And I had to give that sermon again Saturday morning when I got to the store because, unfortunately, I had some students show up less than prepared. And I realized that this is a process. Not everyone is used to taking classes. Not everyone understands that part of coming to a class means that you need to bring your supplies and not rely on the teacher to provide everything. So I gave my little sermon at the beginning of the class, and the store owner was very gracious and said, we talked about it a little bit, and she said that she would make some changes on her end so that when students register for a class, they understand what is involved and what they need to bring. But once we got that out of the way, everybody traced their patterns and cut out their garments and put them together. I had 5 people working on sergers and 1 person working on a sewing machine. Everyone finished a top in the class. Most of the students took them home to hem them. I had one extremely motivated student who cut out 2 tops and got both of them put together and hemmed in the class. And so that was really gratifying to see that. She was pretty motivated because she was heading out of town on a trip and wanted to wear her tops. So I did that, and class was over at about 3:30, and I drove back over to the Mennonite church where the sale was almost finished. And at 4 o'clock, our last customer walked out the door, and everyone got to work. We are a well-oiled machine when we're working together. We took everything down. We put all the tables away. We vacuumed. We mopped. We cleaned everything and got the church back to the condition that it was in when we got there. And we also had a little ceremony where our cashiers gave us the grand total in sales, and we did $2,000 more in sales this year than we did last year. So that was really gratifying. Personally, I had done quite a few canvas grocery bags, and those sold really well. I did some stuffed Christmas trees for home decor, and those sold really well. I went home with a lot less stuff than I came with. Several of my aprons sold. So it was fun. I enjoyed myself. The thing about those kinds of sales is that you can't really predict what is going to be a hot seller. It varies from year to year. So we all try to just make the things that we enjoy making, and everybody's got a little niche. We don't tend to poach on each other's territories. One of my friends does a lot of placemats and table runners. Another one of my friends does linen hand towels and hand-dipped beeswax candles and homemade soap. So it's a wide variety of items, and it seemed like this year people were able to find all sorts of things that they wanted to either buy for themselves or buy as gifts. In some other news this week, I found out that my class proposals that I submitted for teaching at Sew Expo in March were accepted. I submitted 3 knitting class proposals. I chose to do knitting rather than sewing because I didn't think that there were a lot of knitting classes offered last year. Sew Expo offers classes in lots of different fiber arts. It's not limited only to sewing or quilting. And so I thought I had a better chance of getting my proposals accepted if I submitted some knitting class ideas, and all 3 of my proposals were accepted. I'm not going to tell you yet what those classes are. I will just tell you that they are designed for people who already know how to knit and want to level up their skills a little bit. Part of the reason that I didn't do sewing class proposals is because there are people teaching at Sew Expo who have much more experience than I do. It'll be good to teach knitting again. I haven't done that in probably 15 years. So I'm looking forward to having those classes in March. Sew Expo is held in Puyallup, Washington at the State Fairgrounds. It's sponsored by Washington State University, and in 2024, the dates are February 29th to March 4th. So stay tuned, and I will give you additional details as they become available. I'm also going to be teaching in a couple of weeks at the Self-Reliance Festival in Camden, Tennessee. And this is one of those places where a couple of disparate parts of my life collide and intersect. The Self-Reliance Festival is put on by a woman whose podcast I have listened to for probably 8 years now. Her name is Nicole Sauce. The podcast is called Living Free in Tennessee, and despite the name, Living Free in Tennessee is a worldwide community of people who are interested in homesteading, self-reliance, self-sufficiency, and the Self-Reliance Festival is held in October and usually in March too. They have one in the spring and one in the fall. I am going to be there teaching spinning, knitting, and sewing. Nicole and I talked about this, and she said that they realized that these self-reliance festivals and conferences geared toward homesteaders tend to be a little heavy on the things that appeal to men. And while we're not trying to be sexist, because men knit, men sew, I've had men in my classes, we do understand that maybe women come to these things and are looking for classes that they might be interested in or skills that they can learn and pick up. So Nicole asked if I would teach at Self-Reliance Festival, so I will be going to Camden, Tennessee, and I will be doing demos on spinning on a spinning wheel and a hand spindle, and knitting and sewing. So if you're in Tennessee or any place close, go to selfreliancefestival.com and check out the speakers. The keynote speaker this year is going to be Joel Salatin, and if you know anything about regenerative agriculture, you know that Joel is one of the heavy hitters in that area, and I'm really excited that I'm going to be at the same festival that he's going to be at. So my apologies if you came here expecting me to talk entirely about sewing. I realize that I haven't done that on this episode, but there are a lot of parts of my life that intersect and intertwine, and it's hard to talk about one thing without talking about others. So in addition to teaching at Sew Expo and teaching at Self-Reliance Festival, I also have classes coming up at a store called A Clean Stitch in Missoula, Montana. I'll be teaching the Lark Tee in November and the Harper Cardigan in December. And I will also be teaching a pants class in Spokane, Washington in November. I'm not quite sure which pants class I'm doing yet. I have taught the Jaylee Renee pants here in Kalispell. I've done that class a couple of times. One of my projects for this week, which I'll talk about in a little bit when I talk about what I'm sewing, one of my projects for this week is to run up a pair of Jaylee, I believe it's the Eleonora or Eleonora pants. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, but they are another Jaylee pattern for pull-on pants. The Renee pants we've always done in Ponte. This new pattern is geared towards stretch wovens, so I'm going to try some stretch poplin and see how that works. So those are the classes that I have scheduled locally and regionally between now and the end of the year. So let's talk a little bit about what I have been sewing. Last week, I made a Patterns for Pirates cocoon cardigan. I used some spruce green waffle knit fabric that came from the Walmart remnant rack. It sewed up beautifully on the serger. The cocoon cardigan is definitely an instant gratification project. It probably took 2 hours start to finish. If you're ever looking for something where you just need a quick win, I highly recommend that pattern. I also traced some new patterns. I'm really fascinated by knot tops or tops with twists at the necklines, and I'm getting ready to cut out the Linda twist top by Sinclair Patterns. I'm going to make a muslin of that one and see how it fits before I make some tops for myself. I also need to start working on this new pants pattern, so I will be tracing that one and trying that one out this week. It's definitely chillier here now. We're down in the 50s during the day and the lower 40s at night. We haven't had a frost yet, which is amazing. I don't think in the 30 years that I've lived in Montana, we have gone all the way into October without having a frost. But it's definitely chillier outside, and I am stacking up all of my sweater knits to get ready to start making some new cozy tops and cardigans for myself. So in addition to the Harper cardigan, I also like to make myself the 5 out of 4 patterns Nancy Raglan. And I've got a hacked version of the Berta 6315 hoodie pullover that I do a lot of versions for myself in some of the sweater knits and rayon sweatshirt knits and things like that. So that's what I'm sewing this week. The other topic that I wanted to touch on today is Joann Fabrics. Those of you who read my blog know that I have been fairly critical of our local Joann Fabrics store. I try not to be critical of the people who are working there because they have always been very friendly and professional. I think this is a corporate problem that has bled down to the local level. But during the pandemic, our store cut its hours. And after the pandemic, the hours never went back to normal. So right now, our Joann Fabrics is only open from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m., 7 days a week. And they attribute that to staffing issues, which I tend to believe because there has been a revolving door of staff over the past year. There have been a lot of people who I see working there for a week or maybe a couple of weeks, at the most a month, and then they disappear. So our store manager and the assistant manager and a couple of other young women who work there have been there pretty regularly, but in terms of additional staff, they just seem to come and go. There have been days that I have pulled up there at 11 o'clock and seen a sign that says we can't open today because we don't have enough staff, or we won't be opening until 12 o'clock. In addition, when you go into the store, although our store I think is clean, relatively clean compared to some of the other stores that I've been in, our stock is dwindling precipitously. They are down to literally one aisle of apparel fabrics, and it's not even a very large aisle. I have not seen anything be restocked in linens or in denims or in knits. They clearanced a whole bunch of fabric and it didn't get replaced. So I hardly ever shop there for garment fabric anymore, which is a shame because I used to go there for garment fabric, but there's nothing and it doesn't change. The stock never changes. I will go there, or I will send people there to buy clearance fabric for making muslins, but right now that's about it. So my irritation with Joann Fabrics led me to start looking at some of the wider issues. I have given feedback to corporate, which I think fell on deaf ears. And last week, I discovered a YouTube channel called The Sewing Report, and I will put a link to all of this in the show notes. The woman who does the YouTube channel at The Sewing Report, I think, is either a former or current journalist, and she did a video 2 weeks ago that's about 2 hours in length where she did an incredibly deep dive into what has been going on with Joann Fabrics. If you remember Hancock Fabrics, they went out of business, 5 or 6 years ago, and I had heard that they were bought out by a private equity company who liquidated everything. And I suspected that perhaps that was what was happening with Joann Fabrics. And indeed, according to this video on the Sewing Report channel, Joann Fabrics is currently owned by a private equity company. I can't do a good job of recapping this for you. I would suggest that if you're interested, go and read the video or go and watch the video. It's very comprehensive and it's based on verifiable sources. So this woman who did the video went and looked at the Joann Fabrics website, went and looked at the private equity firm's website. She looked at things even down to SEC filings when there was an IPO to raise capital. Joann Fabrics apparently has $1 billion, and that's billion with a B, not million with an M, $1 billion in debt. That's a very big hole to dig yourself out of. I've also spent some time on the Reddit subreddit for Joann Fabrics, and you have to be careful looking at those sites because some of it's hearsay, some of it is complaining from disgruntled employees, but there seems to be a common pattern that Joann Fabrics is hiring only part-time staff at minimum wage. So they are basically gutting their workforce. They laid off a number of employees at their corporate headquarters in Hudson, Ohio. There have been quite a few personnel changes, and I think that they are trying to get their feet under them, but at this point, I don't see a good way out of it for them. They have become a glorified dollar store. Instead of concentrating on providing what sewists want, I think that they were chasing some of their competitors' strategies in carrying lots of cheap imported stuff from China. And I don't think that this is going to end well for them, which is a shame because if Joann Fabrics closes, we will be left with Hobby Lobby and Walmart for our craft supplies. Although at this point, not being able to buy apparel fabric at Joann Fabrics means that I am shopping at Walmart anyway. So it may not be as big a loss as it might be for some other people. I just wish that they had stuck with the reason that they were founded in the first place, which was they were Joann Fabrics. I grew up going to Joann Fabrics. I grew up around Cleveland, and that's where this company was founded in the 40s. So I will be sad to see them go out of business, but bad business decisions lead to these kinds of outcomes. It's a shame because I think they could have capitalized on the resurgence of sewing during the pandemic, and clearly they did not. So for whatever reason, we'll see what happens. But I honestly don't expect Joann Fabrics to be in business in 2024. I think that'll be enough for today's podcast. It's a little shorter than I had wanted it to be, but this is a busy week for me. I'm playing catch up after being so busy last week and being away from home several days. I have a dress to hem for a friend of mine who's going to be in a wedding. Lest any of my local friends get any ideas, no, I don't do alterations on a regular basis, but this is a special favor for a friend of mine. I'll be working on that this week. I'm teaching a serger mastery class tomorrow at the quilt store. I teach the Bernina serger mastery classes for anyone who owns a Bernina model serger. And I will be working on some class samples for a decorative cover stitch class that I'm teaching in November here. It will also be at one of the quilt stores here in Kalispell, and I need to start getting my class samples organized and put together for that. So that's what I'll be working on this week. If you like the podcast, I hope that you will tell your friends. I still haven't heard if Apple has listed it on iTunes. As soon as it's there, I'll let you know so you can go and leave a review. You can check out the podcast show notes at either my website, janetzabo.com, and my last name is spelled S as in Sam, Z as in zebra, A, B as in boy, O, janetzabo.com, or you can type in thestraightstitchpodcast.com, and that will also take you to the same page. The show notes will be listed for this episode. Until our next episode, I hope that you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.